Welcome to RCR Wireless News. I'm Martha DeGrasse, and the topic of today's webinar is components and software that make smartphones smart. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists for today. Ehpraim Ulmer is President and CEO of Galtronics Corporation. Galtronics is our sponsor today and is a leading maker of smartphone antennas. Ehpraim, thank you so much for joining us from Israel today.
Thank you, Martha, for having us.
Carla Fitzgerald is Chief Marketing Officer at Smith Micro Software. Carla, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Martha. We're very happy to be here today.
Glad you could join us. Kymber Umana is Hispanic Marketing Manager at Sprint. Kymber, thanks so much for making the time to be part of our webinar.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And Andrew Rassweiler is Senior Director of Cost Benchmarking Services at IHS Technology, and he's got some great information to share with us today. Andrew, we're so glad you could join us.
Thank you, Martha, for having me.
Quick overview of today's agenda. We're going to start with a look inside the iPhone 5S and the iPad Air. We are about smartphones mostly today. Information to share about the iPad Air as well. We're going to move on from there to an overview of the evolution of the smartphone antenna. And from there, we will move on to on-device software as a way to compete with OTT apps. We'll then move on to a real-world example, Sprint's Spanish-English transcription tool, which launched late last year. And then we'll have a discussion of software as a selling point for carriers and their customers. We'll talk then about carrier aggregation and how this technology will impact devices in 2014. And then we'll discuss the synergy between new software and new components and the opportunities created there. We'll follow that with audience questions as time permits. So if you do have a question, please use your GoToWebinar control panel. A quick overview of RCR Wireless News before we begin. RCR Wireless is a premier news source for the wireless communications industry. Published since 1981, we try to keep our subscribers engaged and informed with breaking stories and enlightening features. Follow us on the web at rcrwireless.com and on Twitter at RCR Wireless News. Now at this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Andrew Rassweiler of IHS Supply. We're looking right now at the inside of the iPhone 5S. Is that right, Andrew?
Yes, and I should be taking over the webinar right now. So hopefully you can see my web page. Can you see my screen, Martha?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to start with a brief introduction of myself and our service here at IHS Corporation. Again, I'm Andrew Rassweiler. I'm the director of the teardown service here at IHS Corporation. We were formerly known as, and you may know us or may have known us as iSupply Corporation here in Los Angeles. So IHS is a market research firm dealing with everything from oil and gas and energy through technology, electronics, and media. And that's the part that I'm part of, obviously. Now, what we've been doing in my group, I manage about 20 people worldwide between here, China, Korea, and Austin, Texas. We tear down hardware. We tear down hundreds of devices a year, and we tear down a lot of different things from handsets to tablets and whatnot. You can see here on my screen, these are a number of upcoming teardowns. As it turns out, you know, one of the things that has always been of interest are kind of high-end smartphones to our audience. And over the years, as you can see, the flavor of what's interesting to the market is changing. You see a Meizu and an Oppo phone here from China. You know, the interest in Chinese OEMs, handset OEMs, ODMs, is increasing as companies like Samsung and Apple have taken over such a large portion of kind of the high end. There's an increasing amount of interest in the low end of smartphones. And we're seeing now a proliferation of Android-based smartphones that are coming in at unheard of price points. So we just tore down a ZTE U793 that clocks in at about a $40 retail price. So you can imagine there's a lot of interest in that. Let's jump over and take a quick look at iPhone 5S. That's been a hot topic, obviously. All the Apple products are for us. And let me show you a little bit about how we do our slice and dice when we take apart a phone, and we basically build up the cost of the device from the ground up. You know, it's kind of a reverse engineering analysis, and if you were to look here, I've pulled up a spreadsheet. This is actually the full bill of materials as we have taken it to in the iPhone 5S. So when we do it, we're not trying to reverse engineer the device, but for lack of a better term, that's what I would refer to it as. Essentially, we take it apart all the way down to the chip resistors and capacitors and create a complete bill of materials. Every item gets costed using you know, our analyst expertise and various tools that we have at our disposal. So you may or may not know, for example, we have experts in the areas of displays, touch screens, memory, etc. Now here's a quick overview of the iPhone 5S cost structure. This is pretty typical of a higher-end smartphone, and you might be a little surprised to see that the bill of materials typically hovers around $200 for the kind of device that might retail without a contract for around $600. Now, our cost assessments do not include a lot of what I would call other costs, software development costs, shipping costs, distribution costs. So it really shouldn't be a surprise to the audience when they see our numbers that bill of is not a larger portion of the total, but that's kind of to be expected here. By the way, this is kind of a typical breakdown of a smartphone. You can see here in the iPhone 5S, you've got about 22% of the bill of materials dedicated to display and touchscreen. And you know, that's very typical because the displays and the touchscreens are such a distinguishing feature when it comes to user experience with a smartphone. All of the OEMs tend to kind of go heavy into their investment in that area. Now, an interesting thing that we'll be talking about, I guess, a bit later in our panel discussion here is the proliferation of sensors inside smartphones and tablets. And one of the distinguishing choices that Apple made with the iPhone 5S was the fingerprint sensor, which is in the iPhone 5S. And what's interesting about it is it's not like the old fingerprint sensors where you used to scan your thumb on your PC. Those linear kind of scanners are kind of old school compared to what Apple has implemented here, and it's not at an insignificant cost, whereas the fingerprint scanners of old might have been just a few dollars, $1 or $2 in today's market. You know, Apple put a significant amount of dollars into that sensor. So you can see here about $190, very typical of that kind of sector of phone. Now, if you were to dig into some of the main printed circuit board which drives the whole design of the iPhone 5S, and then I'll do a quick comparison to the iPad. You would see here that, okay, let me show you this. So one of the things that's of interest, and it certainly ties in well with the one of our other speakers today, Ehpraim, who's going to speak about antennas, is you know, a lot of what Apple has spent money on, I would say, in the iPhone and iPad designs is optimizing the RF and PA section to have fewer and fewer components, certainly fewer components than competitors who are offering similar solutions to their customers. But basically what I'm talking about is this. With LTE bands being very numerous, it's been a challenge for manufacturers to take this part of the design, this RFPA portion of the printed circuit board that I'm highlighting here. It's been a challenge for them to support all these different frequencies with different filters, one for each frequency. All of the RF and PA section components in the early generation LTE phones had a lot more going on than you'll see here. What Apple's done here is they've spent a lot of money working with the module manufacturers such as Skyworks, RF Micro Devices, Avago, to try and limit the number, and you'll see it's actually a very elegant design. These modules soak up a lot of discrete components that other designs might have. But let me fast forward here, and I'm running out of time. And let's talk a little bit about something that they've done on the iPad that's even more interesting. So we were looking at the RF and the power amplifier section of the iPhone 5S, top and bottom. But if you look at the iPad Air. The cool thing that they've done here, and from a consumer and a carrier point of view, it's also interesting. Rather than having different SKUs, one for each carrier, an optimized SKU of the iPad or the iPhone that is optimized just for the LTE bands that each of the carriers has, they've actually aggregated all of the different LTE bands that they need, Apple has, in a way that all of those components are right here on one side of the board in one area, and they have one iPad for all carriers, all markets. And that's a big achievement for Apple. And certainly I would expect companies like Samsung and other manufacturers to be fast followers and try to imitate this strategy, because it's very effective at limiting the number of SKUs that Apple has to sell into the marketplace. Now, with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Martha, and thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. So that is interesting. I think that we have already seen the Nexus 5 follow that same model of one device for several carriers, and it does have a lot to do with the front end and the antennas. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Ehpraim Ulmer. Ehpraim, thank you very much for giving us this presentation on antennas.
Thank you, Marta. And yes, Galtronics is a leading-edge antenna company. We have been doing innovative antennas throughout the years, and that coupled with our integrated manufacturing facilities, so we can execute fast as required in this market, and also at the competitive price points, we increase the value of our technologies and the value of us to our customers. We're focusing on three main market areas: mobile devices, broadband, and infrastructure antennas, where the mobile devices / smartphones is certainly the biggest market for us, the biggest piece of the business. And we have been in 2013 delivering almost 200 million antennas to our customers. When we go to the next slide, you can see the history of our company. So Marta, you want, yeah. The history of our company is 35 years of innovation. Some major milestones, starting in 1978 with the Motorola HT200 two-way radio, moving on to the cell phone of Motorola, the first cell phone of Motorola that had a Galtronics antenna on, and going along with different products for different OEMs, Nokia, Qualcomm, when Qualcomm was still making antennas. And you can see then moving to internal antennas, where the Samsung Galaxy One was one of the major design wins we had in 2010, and then going on to other devices. Now I would like to speak a little bit about the amazing capabilities of a smartphone and the evolution of antennas in this market. So when you look at the left side here of this evolution chart we have put together for you, we see the external antennas that we all almost forgot that they ever existed. But yes, there was only one antenna on a device, and it was screwed on, and it had sometimes a piece to pull out and sometimes not. It was just a stubby, but that's what we had. And then it quickly moved into from external antennas to internal antennas, where then the number of antennas and the components of antennas is growing in the devices. We have the main antenna, the Wi-Fi antenna, the Bluetooth, the GPS, near-field communication. So we add it all up, and it's between 6 and 7 antennas in the most advanced smartphones. We always have the challenge of space. We always should do away with less space and better RF performance. And then that we will see on the next slide is that actually there is a move now going from the internal antennas as a component to a case integrated solution, where you can see on the right side that there are frames, complete frames with number of antennas on the frame, and that trend is increasing certainly as the devices become more complex. And in Galtronics, we're focusing a lot on the development of the technologies that are needed for LTE. There's still a lot of work to do. LTE is long from being exhausted in its capability, and antennas play a very important part in it. So in Galtronics, that is one of the things that we believe we can provide the leading edge antenna technologies also moving forward for LTE, so we can so the operators and the consumers have a good experience. The consumers feel it when there is a bad voice, or when the battery drains quickly, or when the data transmission doesn't work properly. That often is related to an antenna that isn't working as it should be. And on the operator side, it's certainly not good when a device doesn't communicate well, because then there are dropped calls and their data pockets lost, and all that is overloading the network and putting stress on the network that is not really beneficial. So we are happy to present this to you, and we hope it was beneficial here, and LTE is certainly going to play a major role in the future antenna developments inside devices. Thank you.
I think you're right. LTE is far from exhausted, and I think that the growing data consumption and the demands that places on the network are going to only increase. And so with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Carla Fitzgerald of Smith Micro Software. Carla?
Thank you, Martha. Yes, I agree. We're all seeing it. The growth of data on wireless networks is causing mobile operators, device manufacturers, and even consumers to kind of change their behavior, change their plans, and look for ways to have faster, more reliable performance. And you know, Smith Micro, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, we have been in connectivity technologies for almost 30 years. The company is about 31 years old, and we started with, you know, dial-up modem and fax software back when there wasn't wireless yet, but have we evolved with the industry to now provide a connectivity software and policy-based management systems for connecting to wireless networks, whether they're Wi-Fi, 3G, or 4G. So we're very, very familiar with the issues associated with getting devices connected and the struggles that operators have in particular with the massive growth of those connections that are happening not only from mobile phones and iPads, but from, you know, a whole world of M2M devices now.
Right.
So looking at, you know, congestion is one aspect of it, but also from the operator's perspective, they're looking at a lot of traffic that's not associated with growing revenue, things like signaling overhead, inefficient apps that are very chatty, dealing with roaming costs, especially for MVNOs. The idea of being able to support all of these devices without being able to actually have good visibility into how they're accessing network resources, especially as they transition from roaming networks or Wi-Fi networks onto the operator's own cellular network, is very, very challenging. And yet the consumer's expectation only gets higher. You know, they expect smoother, faster data with every generation of technology. They want the same type of experience they might get on a very clear Wi-Fi network to happen everywhere they go. And as applications that are video-driven, multimedia-driven, become more and more prevalent, the consumer expectation continues to increase, yet the capabilities of the operators are still somewhat limited. So there are all these challenges associated with all that growing data.
So what can go on at the device level that helps with this?
Well, what really we're starting to see now is that the operators are using on-device policy management software as really an extension of their network management solutions. So just as a simple example, being able to have radio control on the device, such that based on certain times of day, where certain areas of geography are more congested than others, they can implement policies on the device to actually turn on and off device radios, looking for available clear Wi-Fi networks, onloading devices to 4G when both 3G and 4G signals are available. That type of policy control allows the user, hopefully, to get the optimal experience based on wherever they are and whatever they're doing, and allows some congestion relief to the operator. But I think more importantly, it allows them to offer the best possible user experience, because as these markets get more and more competitive, user experience becomes the key to retention. And any growth that they're going to have in their revenues, it has to be based on great user experience. So,
And
sorry.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you advance the slide one, you'll see that this idea of being able to intelligently manage how devices connect to different networks provides that seamless experience for the user. Because while users are getting more sophisticated, a lot of users really don't want to have to manage their own network scenario. They don't want to have to say, oh, I'm at home, let me turn on my Wi-Fi. Oh, I left home, I'm turning off the Wi-Fi radio because I don't want to drain my battery. Oh, I'm at the office. Well, shoot, I'm not going to worry about it because my boss is paying my data bill, so whatever, Wi-Fi, no Wi-Fi, who cares? These are all scenarios that if the operator can help to facilitate seamless, cost-efficient use of available networks, it's good for the consumer, it's good for the operator, and in many cases, it's good for the enterprise who may be paying the bill.
And the operator is also collecting data about when and where people are being offloaded, where the best connectivity is, maybe even what's going on when they're connected to Wi-Fi networks, right?
Yes, that is a critical component of these types of systems, because if I am dumping data traffic off of my network as an operator, if I don't have my own Wi-Fi access points, if I'm using a partner's Wi-Fi access points or crowdsourced public Wi-Fi, if I am dumping traffic off without understanding the user's experience on that Wi-Fi network, the operator gets blamed for a bad experience. What we're seeing is really funny. When the user has a great network experience, when they're getting their data and things are performing well, they say, I love this device. This phone is awesome. My tablet rocks. But when they have a bad experience, if they can't get to their data, if things are slow, if there's gosh, this network stinks. It's a strange reflection on the industry, but that seems to be the way it is. And so making sure that whether it's the operator owns the Wi-Fi access points or not, they need to make sure that they're collecting connectivity metrics, performance metrics around throughput, around faults, etc., dropped connections. They're collecting all that insight, and they're affecting their policies about connectivity based on that information so they can continually improve the user experience.
Okay, great. So software that makes the network appear smarter and the device appear smarter is key. And then also software that helps operators compete with OTT apps. I think that we're going to talk a little bit about that as well.
Right, because as much as the network performance helps to create satisfied consumers, operators also still need to drive their revenues, whether it's their ARPU or now it's revenue for accounts, etc. But they still have to grow revenues, and there's a big decline in traditional messaging revenues that they've seen over the past few years. In fact, I think Strategy Analytics wrote a report last year that said wireless operators are expected to lose up to $3 billion in mobile messaging revenue over the next 5 years. And that's because you have access to so many services over the top. You have them available, through all of the social networks. You have them available through the app stores, etc. So operators don't just want to, provide the network utility service. They want to be able to provide these engaging applications that also allow them to grow revenues. So whether that is based on messaging services, whether it's ways of selling content, selling advertising, being able to engage in their own service upsells through the device, etc. Those are all things that are important as they deal with the impact of kind of an over-the-top world where new apps come on the market, hour by hour, and typically the operator takes months and months to roll out new services. So this idea of accelerating time to market, offering the ability to engage and do things faster with more options to monetize. That's critical for the operator.
Okay, so take just a quick minute to tell us about one of your solutions, and then we'll move on to the real-world example with Sprint.
Perfect. At Smith Micro, part of our opportunity with operators and with consumers is to be able to make the messaging experience richer, making it visual. And so we offer visual voicemail. We offer premium applications around avatar messaging, content-driven applications, video mail, video cast, the things that you see here on this slide. But the idea is not just the apps themselves, but really creating a platform that the operator can integrate into their back-end systems, their billing and provisioning systems, such that they can engage and monetize through very flexible business models to the consumer. That's really the key, because what consumers value from the operator is the trust relationship on that network, the trust relationship on the account, how they get billed or how they pay for their service, the trust relationship that somebody's going to answer the phone if they need support. Consumers do value that, but they also like the convenience of, buying something off of an app store. So, or getting something free, a freemium model that's paid for by advertising. So the more operators can embrace those consumer preferences, offering freemium business models for some of these rich messaging applications, offering advertising plugins so that some consumers will want a free service and they're more than happy to tolerate advertising to get a free service. Being able to have try and buy, so it's easy to distribute applications to people with very low risk and take advantage of their great. Those are all things that our platform is providing to operators like Sprint. And so one of the examples that we have to talk about today is a recent launch that we had with Sprint on a Spanish voicemail to text transcription service. So at that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Kymber at Sprint.
Thank you, Carla. So as Carla had mentioned previously, we know that the more a customer uses their phone and is happy with their phone, the more likely they are to stay with their carrier, which is why it's so important that Sprint offers enhanced services and meets our customers' needs. So we do work internally as well as with vendors such as with Smith Micro, who can assist us in offering content and services that target different populations within our base. So we actually at Sprint happen to over-index in the Hispanic consumer, and so we really need to look at the needs of that population. And when you think about visual voicemail or visual voicemail to text, the application itself is very universal. Everyone receives and reviews their voicemails on their mobile. However, to make that application more applicable to the Spanish-speaking population, we needed to enhance that product in a way that really mirrors their bilingual life and do that on their phones. So basically with this particular product, when a person receives a Spanish voicemail, they have a Spanish version in text of that voicemail. And when they receive an English voicemail, the text version will be in English. So it's an audit-detect opportunity that the application has to, again, mirror that bilingual customer's life.
Excellent. And so I think that is a good lead to our next topic, which is software as a selling point for carriers and their company and their customers. I think that more and more, especially in the Android world, carriers are looking to on-device software as a way to differentiate and to make a compelling offering to their customers. And Carla, I'd like to begin with you with your thoughts on what some of the key priorities for carriers are right now in 2014 as they consider software as a way to differentiate their smartphone offerings.
Yeah, absolutely, Martha. I think we have a very natural tension with software on devices where, as we heard earlier from an OEM perspective, their goal is to have a single SKU used in as many markets as possible. And while the OEM wants to differentiate with software, they want it to be kind of a consistent experience regardless of what network. On the other hand, you have the operator who wants to differentiate the experience on their network. And due to the high cost and effort and time involved in certifying devices on their network, they would love it if every device from every OEM was completely consistent, because it would allow them to get to market on their network faster. But of course, neither of them can have their own way. They have to compromise. And so I think what we're finding is that one of the priorities for operators is to be able to offer more software services that can be added aftermarket over the top, as well as on their own. Some are creating their own app stores and development platforms that allow their software to get out the door rapidly, whether it's things like visual messaging capabilities, whether it's a storefront that they might be wanting to tie into an RCS rollout for rich communication services, whether it's any type of entertainment apps, etc. I think the idea for the operator is they need to be able to roll out features faster. They need to be able to offer them over the top, and they're trying to avoid preload as much as possible.
Right. So not putting too much of a burden on the smartphone memory with preload. Is that what you're saying?
Well, and it's not even as much memory that we're seeing. We're starting to get so much capacity on these devices. It's more so the process involved in preload and the burden it places on getting devices launched is more the issue. So there are certain things that they will provide in preload. Absolutely. One of the examples is the policy on device technology we talked about earlier. If they want to have really deep embedded controls over the operation of the device, then they need to be able to have those things embedded into the device operating system and or firmware as appropriate, and ship the devices that way. But if they can offer things over the top as an app download or as a maintenance release to the software, then that allows devices to get to market faster, and that's something that is generally the preferred method of getting things out the door. Okay,
but we are seeing, I think, a lot of software loaded into the memory nonetheless. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Now, Andrew, can you comment just briefly on the memory as a cost component? I know that it's come down over the years quite a lot, and maybe isn't coming down quite as quickly now as in the past. Is that right?
Yeah, that's totally valid, and is a point that I like to make. If you were to look at the early days of NAND flash, Apple was and continues, to my knowledge, to be the world's single largest buyer of NAND flash. They were to NAND flash what Kodak was to silver back in the day. They made the market. They drove the cost down. And then if you were to look at that price chart, and I don't have it in front of me, I forget exactly when this happened, but the price erosion stalled significantly. I mean, we all grew used to the idea that for year on year, back when iPods were popular and then iPhones became popular, we grew used to the idea that every year you could double the amount of memory without an impact to the retail price point. And it was several dollars per gigabyte way back when. Now you're talking something that's about 50 cents a gigabyte to the OEM. So, it's no longer a significant cost, but it is not eroding. It is flattening. And one of my theories was I felt that for a while, and certainly this is something that our memory analysts can expand on, was, every year the budget is kind of eroding for a handset. So today's specs in a year will be, let's say, 15% cheaper. So what you do instead is you say, I'm going to keep the budget the same, and I want to see how many more features I can pack in. Well, memory just hasn't been one of those things that has been upgraded over the last few years. And all these new devices with higher resolution cameras, with more streaming content, with more, content in general that's memory intensive, is pushing consumers, one, up the chain to buying higher end phones, which Apple and everybody else wants. They don't really want you to buy that 16 gigabyte version or the 8 gigabyte version. They want you to buy the 32 and the 64 because you're going to need a place to store that. And then the fact that that's kind of plateaued, that those memory configurations haven't doubled year on year, then you could argue that, hey, that is putting an additional burden on the network, because now people are growing more and more used to the idea that, hey, I don't need it on my phone. I'll keep it on the cloud. I'll pull it anytime I want. So yeah, it's a very long topic, as you can imagine. But yes, you're absolutely right. Memory's kind of stalled, and it's just not looked to as that feature that gets beefed up every year now.
Okay, and that leads, doing more and more than the same budget leads to our next topic, which is carrier aggregation. And I think that it's something we're going to probably be seeing more of in the year ahead. Would you agree with that?
Oh, was that directed at me? Sorry.
That's fine.
Yes, I would agree with that.
It seems to me that the carriers are not just, the big carriers are aggregating their spectrum, and then even I think we're going to see some of the smaller carriers maybe teaming up. And of course, this has a lot of implications for the devices and the device cost and the bill of materials. Can you talk a little bit about what that's going to mean, and
Sure.
how that's going to play into device cost in the year ahead?
Sure. So one of the things I was trying to touch upon as I was speaking here with the and iPad Air, and I don't always make my point succinctly, is that what Apple's trying to do is, in a challenging environment, back when phones were just quad band GSM, it was hard enough to get to the point where you could support all 4 bands worldwide, in a cost-effective way. More bands meant, and still means, ultimately kind of more components and more cost. So when we went from the world of quad band GSM and HSPA phones to LTE with the proliferation of the different bands that each carrier supports, that meant a lot more components to support all of those bands. And ultimately, I think that right now what all the manufacturers are trying to do, and carrier aggregation may play a role in this, is try to get to the point where they have fewer SKUs to kind of satisfy as many, if not all, carriers with one device. It's a cost challenge, even with Apple's working on the integration of, from a hardware perspective, they're working on integrating all of these little discrete components, which again, as you multiply the number of bands that need to be supported, you multiply the number of components, you add cost, and they're working against that trend. And what's interesting here is, when I say they're working against that trend, they're spending a lot of money in an area that really doesn't have a lot of, well, for lack of a better term right now, sex appeal to the consumer. Consumer says, what's in it for me with all of this support of LTE bands? Well, what's in it for the consumer is kind of maybe portability of devices, because those devices can work on all these different networks. Now, if carrier aggregation ultimately ends up reducing, let's say, or aggregating which bands are being used, and there are fewer of them, let's say, because of that carrier aggregation, that also facilitates the job of the handset OEM and ultimately could make it cheaper. But right now, to my knowledge, the would not be going away even with carrier aggregation. So the handset OEMs are still facing the same challenge, which is support as many of those bands, if not all of them, in one device at a cost-effective way. And because the technology is moving forward finally in an area which has been kind of, I would say, understaffed and underfunded, which is RF engineering, digital, the world of logic devices, applications processor, always gets the bulk of the engineering community's attention, but finding the resources and the interest in spending a lot of money on analog and RF engineering, which has, until recently almost started to fall by the wayside, I would say, that's where Apple's kind of, spending some interesting money doing something that might, to the average consumer, not appear to have an immediate benefit.
So more focus on the front end. So Ehpraim, that's something that I know that you spend a lot of time on. What are you hearing?
Around the carrier aggregation, what we hear is that, on top of what Andrew said, is that in order to make LTE work properly and get the data streams functioning in the right speed, you need a broader band segment to make it work than what most carriers have in a continuous way. So they need to take different data streams, and you can think about it like pipes that you need to put together into one wider stream to get the data transmitted. Now, in order to do that, you need to have good antennas, and antennas that can work on a broad spectrum, and that is a big challenge because the spaces are limited, and to pack it all in is not easy. And that is where we see that antenna technologies needs to continue to develop, and there's lots of innovation going on in this space in general amongst the antenna experts, and we just see that this is something that will be very important in order to really build on the potential that LTE actually has as a technology.
Okay, great, thank you. And I know that Sprint is aggregating several bands for Sprint Spark. Kymber, can you give us a quick overview of what Sprint is doing in this area?
Sure. So with Sprint Spark, it will include carrier aggregation in the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum band. And with Sprint Spark and carrier aggregation, we can build the fastest broadband pipe in the market. So when someone is referring to, what's in it for the customer, what's in it for them is, the fastest speed possible. So we expect to be able to achieve peak speeds as high as 1.3 gigabits with 3-channel carrier aggregation. And as early as 2015, we're looking forward to offering a network speed advantage over most U.S. competitors utilizing these capacities.
That's very exciting. Okay, does anybody else have any further comments on carrier aggregation before we move on? Okay, great, thank you. Well, our last topic is the synergy between the software and the components. Obviously, the biggest benefit to consumers comes when these work together. And I think that sensors, which we spoke about a little bit earlier, is one area where this really comes into play, because not only do the sensors need the software to collect the data, but then also I believe that it can be analyzed and turned into actionable intelligence. So Andrew, can you just start us off? And we don't have a lot of time left, but can you just give us a brief overview of some of the most exciting things that you're seeing on the horizon with sensors from the hardware perspective, and then maybe Carla can talk about it a little bit from a software perspective.
Yeah, so actually at IHS we have a team that is dedicated to doing research in the area of sensors. Specifically, they started primarily in the MEMS area. And they track that a lot more closely than I do, so chances are they might have certainly some more color to add to this than I do. One of the disadvantages of being the teardown guy is we tend to see the state of the current art of production, but we're not on the cutting edge of what's about to come out because it's not hardware yet. So what we see is what is currently the state of the art. And I would say that, interestingly, there's a lot of talk about penetration of sensors. An interesting factoid, by the way, I just learned from our sensor team is that 50% of the entire sensor market goes into the automotive industry. So now a lot of that has to do with the fact the ASPs are much higher in that industry. But in phones, really, we haven't seen a lot of what I would say a huge amount of progress in what's in there. The same sensors that you have now are the sensors we've had for the last 4 or 5 years, since about, let's say, the iPhone 3GS. So you've got accelerometer, you've got a gyroscope, you've got, what am I missing here? There's a third MEMS sensor. There has always been the sensor, for example, that senses the infrared heat off of your face so that it knows when you're putting the phone up to your face. And now, in the most recent iteration of iPhone, as I mentioned, there's the fingerprint sensor, which again, you could see Apple spent a lot of money on that. $13 roughly for the budget for that, $12, let's say, for the sensor itself. That's a lot of money just for a sensor. So obviously Apple feels that there's an important kind of product differentiator there. They're looking for some innovations. The next thing that I suppose is probably going to be hot, and you already begin to see it in some of the more cutting edge devices, is gesture sensing. So let's say a la Kinect. or you know, the other game consoles. So you know, that's expected certainly to have a lot of pickup here in the near future as the cost of the components comes down significantly. Because the cost of the Kinect, for example, right now we have that estimated somewhere around $60 to $75 for that device. So the trick is, how do you get Kinect-like, you know, Microsoft Xbox Kinect-like functionality into a phone at a cost-effective price point, because nobody wants to add $60 to that smartphone just for that feature right now.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. And Carla, what would you say as far as the way that some of the data that the carrier actually is able to get from smartphone sensors can then be turned into intelligence?
You know, the big focus on big data right now is getting so much attention because of the fact that, you know, information is power. And, you know, a simple example of how these sensors can help to affect network policy and then affect the user experience is in like the accelerometer, as Andrew was talking about. If you're looking at things like Wi-Fi offload policy, you know, my networks, we want to have a good network experience. We want the user's phone to be connected to Wi-Fi where it's available. If the user is sedentary at the office, at the coffee shop, etc., moving that data traffic to Wi-Fi probably makes sense as long as the Wi-Fi network itself is high performing. But if the user is on the freeway, you know, going 70 miles an hour, which I hear that happens in some parts of the country, certainly not where I live, but assuming there's good movement and they're driving down the freeway, that phone should not be trying to connect to every Wi-Fi network it's passing along, you know, each Starbucks, McDonald's, etc., all along the freeway route. So the accelerometer can be used as a sensor that feeds the Wi-Fi offload policy. If the device is moving rapidly, don't try to offload to a Wi-Fi network. If the device is not moving, it's potentially a good opportunity to wake up the Wi-Fi radio, see if there's a clear signal, and try to connect. So that's a really simple example. But the more we think about all of the behaviors that are being captured by the phone, whether it's the user using a swipe gesture on the phone, whether it's their eyes looking at the tablet to watch the video, not watch the video, all of these things are information pieces that the key to the operator is saying, how can I help make this easier for the subscriber by knowing what they're doing before and after all of their activity? You know, what did they do before they turned on this app? What did they do after they shut down this operation? All of that information helps to give them clues on how to make the experience simpler, more reliable, faster, etc. And those are all things, again, that drive a positive user engagement and more retention.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We are almost out of time. Before we finish, I would like to touch one more time on one of the points that was made and come back to Ehpraim for his thoughts on that, because we heard earlier about device portability and the opportunity to take one device from carrier to carrier, which seems to be something that people are becoming more interested in doing. And so, Ehpraim, before we close, I'd just like to get your thoughts on that from the antenna perspective.
Yes, the antenna is playing a very, very major role because the spins are often, everything is the same in the device, and only the antenna is tuned specifically to specific carrier frequency ranges. So if you want to move a phone from one carrier to another, then if the phone is not a phone that can function on all the frequencies at the very high level, then the consumer will certainly suffer, and also the carrier will have trouble with the quality of the communication, if it is voice or data, and these are all very significant costs for the carrier, and of course the consumer will be unhappy, and that's in turn cost again. And so it's certainly the antennas, the importance of antennas and antenna performance is becoming more and more critical for the consumer and for the carrier. And we can see that in our development labs and the demands that we get from our customers. It's certainly moving in that direction, that consumers can move their devices freely without having the concern of quality by moving a device from one carrier to the other.
It is something I think we'll see more of, and I think it's kind of gets back to what Carla said earlier. If things go well, it's all about the device, and if things don't go well, unfortunately, it may be the network that gets the blame. So, good making sure that that all works out. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. I'd like to thank our panelists today. Ehpraim Ulmer is President and CEO of Galtronics. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the. It was a great. Thank you.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Carla is Chief Marketing Officer at Smith Micro Software. Carla Fitzgerald, thank you very much. I think we all learned a lot from you today.
Thank you so much, Martha, and to the other panelists and to our audience for joining in. We're very excited about all of the advancements in this connectivity market, both where mobile phones and all of the devices in our M2M world. So this is all exciting stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Kymber Umana is Hispanic Marketing Manager at Sprint. Kymber, we'll have to follow up with you again because there's so much we didn't even talk about with the growth in mobile usage among Hispanic Americans. So I hope we'll get another chance to speak with you again soon.
Thank you. It is a great opportunity to talk about a real-world example as someone on the marketing side. You know, we take what those on the technical side make for us and then put it into apps and products and services for the consumer and talk to it in a way that, you know, resonates with them. So it's interesting to see that entire progress from start to finish here. So I'd be happy to come back and talk more about Hispanic Americans and the type of services they use.
All right. Well, we will take you up on that. And Andrew Rassweiler, Senior Director of Cost Benchmarking Services, at IHS. It was great to get an inside look at the costs of smartphones as well as the iPad Air, and we thank you very much for sharing that information with our audience.
Well, thank you for having me again, and I've tried to answer all the questions that I saw pop up on the webinar. You know, if there are others, I assume, Martha, there's a way attendees can forward those questions to you, I assume?
Yes, we do save the questions, and we can make those available to the panelists, and we will do that. Thank you. And if anybody joins, you can download the entire webinar at rcrwireless.com. It should be available later this afternoon. So this has been Components and Software That Make Smartphones Smart, RCR Wireless News. Thank you very much for joining us, and this will conclude today's webinar.